Hi everyone, nice to see you again. Welcome back to the second video in this series on pitch accent. I'd like to start by asking, I don't normally say asking. I'd like to start by asking a very simple question. What is pitch accent? This is actually where the problems start, in my opinion. It's not that obvious what pitch accent is. Now don't get me wrong, I've watched Dorgen's course, I have a pretty good understanding of the material that he presented in it. I know what pitch accent is in the sense that he explains it in his videos. When I say that it's not clear to me what pitch accent actually is, what I'm saying is that I don't know what it's for. I don't know what its function is in the Japanese language as a whole. I've thought about it, I've tried to figure it out, and I'm going to present to you my conclusions, but it's still not 100% clear to me what it's for or why it exists. Now, this YouTube channel isn't about English, but in this video we're going to be spending quite a lot of time talking about stress in English, and that will, I believe, facilitate an understanding of just what the problem is with pitch accent in Japanese and why it's not clear what it's for. In the most fundamental sense, Japanese pitch accent is a way of drawing attention to certain parts of an utterance by having a fairly noticeable fall in pitch between two syllables, or if you want to call them mora, two mora. So, for example, the Japanese word for Tokyo is Tokyo, or if I exaggerate that a bit, Tokyo, whereas the Japanese word for Kyoto, surprise, surprise, is Kyoto. Again, if I exaggerated, Kyoto. Now, those two words have different pitch accent patterns. Tokyo is heiban and Kyoto is atamadaka. There are other pitch accent patterns in Japanese, but going through them all is not the objective of this series of videos. What I want to do here is ask, what is the point of this? This additional layer of complexity that is laid down, if you like, on top of the individual sounds being made, what is the point of it? What, if anything, is it useful for in Japanese? So we're going to come back now to the idea of stress in English. It's difficult to overstate the importance of stress in English. If I say an English word like paper, you understand intuitively that it's the first syllable and not the second syllable that bears the stress. If I say a word like perhaps, you understand that here the converse is true and that it's the second syllable that bears the stress and not the first syllable. When we say that a syllable is stressed in English, what we mean is that subjectively speaking, it jumps out at us. It stands out more than the syllables around it. If you ask what the phonetic characteristics of that syllable are that make it stand out more than the syllables around it, well, that's something that varies from one language to another. But in English, you have the volume of the stressed syllable, you have its duration, because a stressed syllable will almost always be longer than the syllables around it. You have vowel quality, because a stressed syllable will be produced with its full vowel quality, whereas an unstressed syllable will usually be pronounced with some sort of reduced vowel quality. And you also have the question of pitch. If I say paper, you can hear that the pitch of the first syllable, the stressed syllable, was higher than the pitch of the second syllable. That is not an absolute rule in English. You can quite legitimately pronounce a word with an unstressed syllable at a higher pitch than the stressed syllable. What are you eating? Bacon. You can hear when I say bacon, the second syllable, the unstressed syllable, is at a higher pitch than the first syllable, because the intonation pattern that I'm using in that particular utterance requires me to say it like that. Under normal circumstances, if you say a word in a neutral fashion, the stressed syllable, though, will be at a higher pitch than the unstressed syllable. Bacon, bacon, right? So the relationship between pitch and stress is quite complicated. Now we have to dip into a little bit of phonology here and consider what it means for something to be used phonemically or lexically in a language. If some sort of phonetic characteristic of a word can be changed to turn word A into word B, that means that that characteristic is phonemic or lexical in the language in question. So I can say, for example, beat, and I can say bead. And you understand as a speaker of English that those are two different words, but there are many languages where you can't do that. Let me put it like this. A D at the end of a word is going to be pronounced exactly the same way as a T at the end of a word. Russian is like this. All of these word final consonants are D-voiced. Don't worry if you don't understand every detail of this. Just bear in mind that in some languages, something can be used to turn word A into word B, and that in other languages, we don't accept that. You can't use that characteristic to turn word A into word B. I promise you this will get clearer as we go along. In English, stress isn't really very lexical. It's not very phonemic. It's very, very difficult to find situations in which you can turn one word into a different word by changing the way you use stress in those words. Now, there are small numbers of word pairs in English where you can change one word into another word simply by changing the stress, but by leaving the vowel qualities as they originally were. But all of them, at least all of the ones that I can think of, with one exception, are words like insult and insult, where you're changing either a verb into a noun or a noun into a verb, right? So insult is the verb and insult is the noun. Import is the verb, but import is the noun. You get word pairs like this in English. If you leave this sort of word pair to one side, then there's only one word pair, at least in my accent. Obviously accents vary around the world, right? But there's only one word pair in my accent where you can change one word into a completely different word by moving the stress and leaving the vowel qualities as they originally were. And that's this very peculiar pair of words, below and billow. Those are obviously different words, and all I've done is move the stress from one syllable to another. If you take this small set of verb-noun pairs and the below-billow pair and ignore them, it's essentially impossible in English, and I may have missed other counterexamples, but it's essentially impossible in English to turn one word into another by simply moving the stress from one place to another, right? What that means is that when people get confused about where the stress is in an English word and mispronounce it, they don't end up saying some other word by accident. They just end up saying something that sounds really weird and that is often extremely difficult to understand. Let me give you some real examples that I've heard from my students. See if you can figure out what I'm saying, which words I'm saying. Sonata. This is actually senator, that's what it was supposed to be. Terrace, that was actually supposed to be terrace. Marketing, that was actually supposed to be marketing. When you put the stress in the wrong place in English, all the other things that tend to go along with stress also tend to change. The vowel qualities will change, syllable durations will change. Obviously the volume or the intensity of the syllable will change, and the pitch may change as well in a way that is not conducive to being understood. Take a word like charity, for example. If I mispronounce that and put the stress on the second of the three syllables, I'm going to get something like charity, charity. Would you understand charity? No. What if I take the stress and put it on the final syllable? Charity, charity. You can hear that I'm reducing the other syllables because that's the way English stress tends to work. When a syllable isn't stressed, the vowel at the core of that syllable will tend to be reduced. I work for a charity. I work for a charity. I work for a charity. Would you be likely to understand someone if they mispronounce this word in this fashion? No. If you take a longer word with more syllables like electricity, which has 5, then it's easier to understand words like this even if the stress has been put in the wrong place, because there are so many syllables in the word, there's so much information in the word that you'll be able to figure it out. Take for example electricity. Sounds pretty weird. This strange pronunciation is gonna perhaps make you do a double take, but you should understand it. That is by the by. The point is that stress in English isn't lexical to any significant extent. It's very hard to turn one English word into some other English word simply by moving the stress and keeping everything else the same, most obviously the vowel qualities. But that doesn't alter the fact that stress is incredibly important. It's very hard to understand what people are saying when they put their stress in the wrong place. And yes, of course, I know that Brits and Americans, for example, often stress words differently, but that's something separate that we can't go into here. Now, if you look at pitch accent, Japanese pitch accent, and here we'll be looking at the standard Japanese dialect, if you like, the dialect of Japanese that's spoken in the Kanto plain where Tokyo is. Japanese pitch accent is very lexical. What I mean is that it's very, very easy to find lots of pairs of words where you can change one word into a completely different word by changing the pitch accent pattern and nothing else. We will be looking at some examples of this below, but for the time being, let me just make this observation. The fact that pitch accent is lexical makes it sound like it should be very important in Japanese, but the fact of the matter is that it doesn't seem to be as important as you would expect it to be. What I mean by that is that if you use the wrong pitch accent pattern, Japanese people still seem to do a pretty good job of figuring out fairly quickly what you're actually trying to say. And that would explain to a significant extent why it is that perfectly conscientious native Japanese teachers don't make very much attempt to correct their students when those students make mistakes with pitch accent. This seems to be a little bit paradoxical. English stress doesn't really turn one word into another word if you make a mistake with it, but it's very important to get it right. Japanese pitch accent is quite good at turning one word into what is technically a completely different word, but for some reason it doesn't seem to be that important to get it right. I'm not saying it's not important, just saying it doesn't seem to be that important. Now we're going to look at this characteristic of Japanese pitch accent in another video. For the moment I want to go back to English and think a little bit more about stress.